The heavy chains bit into Serena's flesh as the distant rumble of the approaching train sent vibrations through the cold metal tracks she was brutally secured to. Her 5-month-old cub, Roan, instead of fleeing to safety, frantically worked at the chains with a determined intelligence that defied everything scientists understood about wild animal behavior. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The early morning mist clung to the ancient pines of the Oak Ridge forest, shrouding the railroad tracks that cut through the wilderness like a steel scar. Dawn had barely broken, casting everything in a ghostly blue haze as raindrops began to fall, gentle at first, then steadily increasing. The train tracks glistened, wet and cold, stretching endlessly into the foggy distance. This remote stretch of railway, rarely traveled except by the 6:15 freight train, had become the stage for a drama that would test the very limits of maternal courage and filial devotion. Serena, a 4-year-old female bobcat with distinctive russet fur marked by elegant black rosettes, struggled against the heavy chains that bound her to the railroad tracks. Her powerful muscles, capable of bringing down prey twice her size, strained uselessly against the unyielding metal. The chains bit into her fur, cold and unforgiving, wrapped deliberately around her midsection and secured to the rails with padlocks. A thin trickle of blood matted the fur on her right flank, where the metal had rubbed her raw. Every few seconds her ears twitched backward, listening for the distant rumble that would signal approaching death. But for now there was only the soft patter of rain and the occasional call of a morning bird, oblivious to the life and death struggle below. Beside Serena, a small bobcat kitten barely 5 months old paced anxiously. Roan, her only surviving cub from a litter of 3, had his mother's distinctive spotted coat and the characteristic bob tail that gave their species its name. His eyes, still more blue than the amber they would eventually become, were wide with distress as he sensed his mother's fear and pain. How had it come to this? Less than 12 hours earlier, they had been hunting together in the sheltered ravine that had become their territory after leaving their den 2 months ago. Wildlife biologist Dr. Elena Rodriguez adjusted her rain jacket as she drove her mud-spattered Jeep along the Forest Service road. At 36, she had spent the last decade tracking and studying the dwindling bobcat population in the Pacific Northwest. Her weathered face, tanned from years in the field, was set in lines of concentration as she checked the tracking device on her dashboard. "Signal's still strong, Mark," she said to her research assistant who was scrutinizing a topographical map. "Serena should be just north of these coordinates. Her pattern's been odd the last 24 hours, completely stationary since midnight." Mark Phillips, a graduate student in his late 20s with shaggy brown hair and perpetually smudged glasses, frowned at the steady beep emanating from the receiver. Could the collar be malfunctioning? Or maybe she's denning somewhere new. Elena shook her head. She left the den months ago. Roan is old enough to travel with her now. And we checked that collar thoroughly during the last recapture. Something's not right. What Elena couldn't know was just how right she was. As their Jeep bounced over the rutted road, the wildlife researchers were heading toward a confrontation with human cruelty that would shake even their experienced sensibilities. 2 miles away, Serena continued her desperate struggle. The chains had been secured by expert hands, allowing just enough slack for breathing but not enough for escape. The bobcat's golden eyes darted frantically, searching for any sign of the men who had done this to her. The memory was fresh and terrifying. They had come in the night, 2 men with harsh voices and the sharp smell of whiskey clinging to them like a second skin. They had tracked her through the forest, their powerful flashlights cutting through the darkness. Serena had hidden Roan in a hollow log when she first sensed danger, her maternal instincts sending the silent command that her cub had instantly obeyed. Then she had led the men away, hoping to draw them from her offspring's hiding place. but they had been prepared for her. The net had dropped without warning, tangling her powerful limbs. The sharp sting of a tranquilizer dart had followed, not enough to fully sedate her, but sufficient to make her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Through the drugged haze, she had heard their laughter as they carried her through the forest. "This'll teach that ranger to stick his nose where it don't belong," one had growled, his voice slurred with alcohol and malice. "When he finds what's left of his precious tracking project, he'll think twice about reporting our operation." The other man had grunted in agreement as they reached the railroad tracks. "Shame to waste such a beautiful pelt, though. Could have got good money for it. Too risky. This sends a clearer message. Now help me with these chains." Their rough hands had secured the metal links around her body, tightening them until they bit into her flesh. By then, the tranquilizer had begun to wear off, but it was too late. The chains were locked, the men departing with final, cruel laughs echoing through the trees. What the men hadn't counted on was Roan. The bobcat cub, following his mother's scent through the night forest, had witnessed the final moments of her capture from the shadows. After the men departed, he had approached cautiously, his small body trembling with fear and confusion. Now, as the morning grew lighter despite the rain, Roan circled his mother, occasionally pawing at the chains and making small distress sounds deep in his throat. Serena responded with gentle rumbles, trying to soothe her cub even in her desperate situation. It was then that they both felt it, a faint vibration in the rails. Miles away but approaching steadily, the 6:15 freight train had departed the station and was building speed, unaware of the life and death drama unfolding on its path. Elena felt it too, a sense of growing urgency as the tracking signal led them closer to the railroad tracks. She accelerated slightly, the Jeep bouncing harder over the uneven ground. "I don't like this, Mark. Call Ranger Stevens and tell him we might need backup, and make sure the rescue kit is ready." Mark nodded, reaching for the radio as he braced himself against the vehicle's jostling. "What do you think we're going to find?" Elena's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but Serena hasn't moved from those coordinates in almost 8 hours. That's not normal behavior, especially with a cub to feed." They broke through the tree line just as the first distant whistle of the freight train echoed through the misty forest. What they saw froze them both in momentary shock. The adult bobcat chained to the tracks, her cub frantically pacing beside her, and the train's headlight just visible through the fog in the distance. "Oh my God," Mark whispered, already reaching for the tranquilizer rifle and bolt cutters from their equipment case. Elena was already out of the Jeep, her boots hitting the gravel with determined force. Years of training kicked in, overriding the horror of the scene before her. "Call it in now," she shouted to Mark. "Tell them to contact the railroad. They need to stop that train." As she sprinted toward the trapped bobcat, Elena knew they were in a desperate race against time. The train was coming fast and the chains looked solid and secure. Behind her, she could hear Mark's urgent voice on the radio, but her focus was entirely on the animals ahead. What she didn't yet realize was that she was about to witness one of the most remarkable displays of animal intelligence and devotion she had ever encountered in her long career. A mother's desperate fight for survival, and a cub's extraordinary courage that would challenge everything she thought she knew about these remarkable creatures. Elena approached the chained bobcat with measured steps, her hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. Behind her, Mark was frantically speaking into the radio, his words tumbling over each other as he tried to convey the urgency of the situation. The distant train whistle sounded again, closer this time, cutting through the steady drum of rain. "Easy, girl," Elena murmured, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm here to help." Serena's response was a warning growl, her body tensing against the chains. Though she recognized the woman's scent from previous research encounters, fear and pain had overridden any sense of familiarity. Her golden eyes, wild with panic, darted between Elena and the approaching train. "Mark, those bolt cutters now!" Elena called over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off the trapped animal. Railroad dispatcher says they're trying to contact the train, Mark reported as he hurried forward, the heavy bolt cutters clutched in his hands. But they can't guarantee they'll reach the engineer in time. Elena nodded grimly, extending her hand for the tool. I'll try to cut her free. Get the transport cage ready and prepare a mild sedative, half the usual dose. We don't want to compromise her ability to move once she's free. As Elena inched closer to the chained bobcat, something unexpected happened. Roan, the cub who had been circling anxiously, suddenly positioned himself between Elena and his mother. But instead of displaying aggression, the young bobcat made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a mewl, his blue eyes fixed on Elena with an almost pleading expression. "My God," whispered Mark, who had returned with the sedative kit. "It's like he understands we're trying to help." Elena had witnessed many examples of animal intelligence in her career, but something about this interaction felt different, more deliberate, more cognizant. There was no time to analyze it now, however. The train's whistle blew again and the rails beneath their feet began to vibrate more intensely. "Hold the sedative for now," she decided quickly. "I don't think we'll need it. This cub is keeping her calm." With careful movements, she approached the chains, Roan watching her every move but making no attempt to interfere. The bolt cutters were designed for wildlife rescue operations, their hardened steel jaws capable of cutting through snares and traps. But these chains were heavier, industrial grade, secured with padlocks that the tool wasn't designed to break. Elena positioned the cutters on a section of chain between two links and squeezed with all her strength. The metal strained but held. "Damn it." She repositioned and tried again, her muscles burning with effort. This time, a satisfying snap as one link gave way. But there were multiple chains, wrapped in several configurations around Serena's body and the rails. The train whistle sounded again, much closer now. Through the thinning fog, they could see its headlight approaching around a distant bend. "We're not going to make it," Mark said, his voice tight with tension. "I'll try flagging down the train." He turned to sprint down the tracks, waving his bright orange field vest over his head. Elena knew it was futile. At its current speed, the freight train would need at least a mile to stop completely. They had maybe 2 minutes before impact. She attacked another chain with renewed desperation, sweat mingling with raindrops on her face. It was then that Roan did something remarkable. The cub darted forward and began tugging at a section of chain near his mother's hindquarters, a portion that had some slack where it looped through itself before connecting to the padlock. His small teeth gripped the metal, pulling with surprising strength for his size, while his paws worked at creating more space between the chain and his mother's body. Helena paused, watching in amazement as she realized what the cub was attempting. "He's trying to create enough slack for her to slip part of her body free," she breathed. Understanding flashed in her mind like lightning. She couldn't break all the chains in time, but perhaps they didn't need to. If they could create enough slack in strategic places, Serena might be able to twist free. "Smart boy," Elena whispered, shifting her attention to a different section of chain. Working in unintentional tandem with the cub, she used the bolt cutters to create slack in another area, cutting links where they would maximize mobility without necessarily breaking the entire restraint. Serena seemed to understand as well. The bobcat stopped struggling randomly and began making controlled movements, testing each section as Elena and Roan created more freedom, systematically working her body against the loosening constraints. The ground beneath them trembled as the train rounded the final bend, now fully visible through the rain, its horn blaring continuously as the engineer finally spotted the figures on the track. The massive machine began to break, metal screeching against metal, but physics was unyielding. It would never stop in time. "Elena!" Mark shouted from down the track, running back toward them. "You need to get off the tracks now!" But Elena couldn't abandon Serena. With one final powerful cut, she severed a crucial link connecting two sections of chain. "That's all I can do," she told the bobcat, as if the animal could understand her words. The rest is up to you." Backing away, she watched as Serena made a desperate twisting motion, leveraging the new slack Elena had created while Roan continued pulling at his section. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a violent, wrenching movement, the bobcat's powerful muscles contracted in perfect coordination, and she slipped partially free of the main restraint. She wasn't completely loose. One back leg remained firmly chained to the rail, but she had gained enough mobility to twist her body mostly off the track. The train was less than 30 seconds away, bearing down on them with unstoppable force. What happened next would stay with Elena for the rest of her life. Roan, seeing his mother still partially trapped, made a decision that no human could have anticipated from a wild animal so young. The cub positioned himself at the final chain, binding his mother's leg, his small teeth working frantically at the unyielding metal. When that proved ineffective, he changed tactics, digging furiously at the gravel around the railroad spike where the chain was secured. "Get away from there!" Elena screamed, her voice drowned by the train's deafening horn and the squeal of its brakes. But Roan continued his desperate effort, somehow seeming to understand that loosening the railroad tie was their last hope. With the train merely seconds away from impact, Elena made a split-second decision that went against all her professional training. She lunged forward back onto the tracks, bolt cutters raised for one final attempt at the last chain. Time collapsed into a series of fragmented moments. The deafening blare of the train horn, the ground shaking beneath Elena's feet, the flash of terror in Serena's golden eyes, the determined set of Roan's small body as he continued to dig at the railroad tie, and the sudden, unexpected give of metal as Elena's bolt cutters finally snapped through the last crucial link. Mark's scream was lost in the cacophony as Elena grabbed Serena by the scruff of her neck, a dangerous move with any wild predator, but one born of pure desperation. With strength she didn't know she possessed, Elena heaved the partially freed bobcat toward the edge of the tracks. Serena, understanding the imminent danger, coordinated her movements with Elena's, using her newly gained mobility to propel herself off the rail. They tumbled together down the gravel embankment just as the freight train thundered past, its metal wheels mere inches from where they had been seconds before. The ground shook violently, loose stones cascading around them as they rolled to a stop in the muddy earth below the tracks. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe, the wind knocked from her lungs by the impact. When she managed to gasp in a painful breath, her first thought was of the bobcat. Had she injured Serena in the desperate rescue? Had the remaining chains caused further damage as they fell? Serena lay on her side a few feet away, chest heaving, remnants of chain still wrapped around her hindquarters but no longer attached to the tracks. Their eyes met briefly, wild animal and human, and Elena saw something she had never witnessed in all her years of wildlife research. A moment of recognition, perhaps even understanding, before the bobcat's natural wariness reasserted itself. "Elena." Mark was scrambling down the embankment, his face ashen. "Are you insane? You could have been killed." She ignored him, her attention focused on a more pressing concern. "Where's the cub? Where's Roan?" The train was still passing, a seemingly endless procession of cargo containers that blocked their view of the opposite side of the tracks. Elena's heart sank. Had Roan made it off in time? The young bobcat had been so focused on freeing his mother, working at that railroad tie until the very last second. "I didn't see him get clear," Mark admitted, his voice hollow as he helped Elena to her feet. Blood trickled from a scrape on her forehead, but she barely noticed. Serena was struggling to stand, her movements hampered by the remaining chains. Despite her obvious distress, the bobcat's attention was fixed on the passing train, her ears pricked forward in alert concentration. When the final car cleared, revealing the opposite embankment, Elena held her breath. The rain had lightened to a fine mist, visibility improving with each passing moment. They scanned the area, searching for any sign of the small spotted form. Then, miraculously, a movement caught Elena's eye. From beneath a tangle of ferns just beyond the opposite rail, Roan emerged, his fur muddy, but his body seemingly unharmed. The cub had somehow darted under the train at the last possible instant, finding refuge on the other side. "He made it," Elena whispered, relief washing through her with such intensity that her knees nearly buckled. Mark laughed shakily, pushing his rain-spattered glasses back up his nose. "That is one remarkable animal." Their relief was short-lived. Though safe from the immediate danger of the train, they still faced significant challenges. Serena was partially wrapped in chains, injured, and separated from her cub by the tracks. The bobcat was growing increasingly agitated, sensing her vulnerability and clearly desperate to reach her offspring. "We need to get these chains off her completely," Elena said, examining the metal links still encircling Serena's hindquarters. "And we need to do it quickly, before she injures herself further." "Should we sedate her now?" Mark asked, already reaching for the kit. Elena considered the situation. Standard protocol would indeed call for sedation. Working this closely with an injured wild predator was extremely dangerous otherwise, but something about this extraordinary bobcat made her hesitate. "Not yet," she decided. "Look at her. She's focused on her cub, not us. I think she understands we're trying to help." Mark looked skeptical, but didn't argue. He'd worked with Elena long enough to trust her judgment even when it defied conventional wisdom. Elena slowly approached Serena, bolt cutters ready. "Easy, girl," she murmured. "Let me get these off you, and you can go to your boy." Whether through understanding or simply exhaustion, Serena remained relatively still as Elena carefully cut away the remaining chains. Only when the final link fell away did the bobcat move, rising shakily to her feet, her right flank bloody where the metal had cut into her flesh. Across the tracks, Roan paced anxiously, making small vocalizations that tugged at Elena's heart. The cub clearly wanted to rush to his mother but seemed hesitant to cross the tracks again, a learned wariness that might well save his life in the future. "We need to help them reunite," Elena said, "and then get Serena's wounds treated." Just then, the radio on Mark's belt crackled to life. "Phillips, come in. This is Ranger Stevens. What's your status? Over." Mark grabbed the radio. "We're alive, barely. We've freed the bobcat from the tracks, but she's injured. The cub is safe too." "Thank God," came the reply. "I've got a team en route to your location. ETA 15 minutes. I'm also bringing Dr. Harmon from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center." "Copy that," Mark responded. "We'll need the vet. And Steve, you're going to want to document this scene. This wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately chained this bobcat to the tracks." There was a momentary silence before the ranger's voice returned, harder now. "Understood. We'll treat it as a crime scene. Preserve what evidence you can." As Mark confirmed their coordinates, Elena's attention remained fixed on the bobcat family. Serena had managed to cross to the other side of the tracks, moving with painful slowness but clear determination. When she reached her cub, the reunion was tender beyond words, Roan pressing his small body against his mother's side, both animals vibrating with soft purrs despite their ordeal. "Who would do something like this?" Mark asked quietly, returning to Elena's side. "And why?" Elena's expression hardened as she recalled the chains, methodically placed and locked. This was no impromptu act of cruelty, but something calculated and deliberate. "I don't know," she replied, "but I intend to find out." The rain had stopped completely now, the morning sun breaking through the clouds and glinting off the wet rails. In its light, Elena could see something she had missed before, a small blue tag attached to one of the discarded chains. Moving carefully, she retrieved it, turning the plastic marker over in her palm. "What is it?" Mark asked, leaning closer. Elena's face paled as she read the faded lettering. "It's a tracking tag," she said, her voice tight. "One of ours. From the conservation program." Mark's eyes widened in comprehension. "You mean—" "Someone used our own equipment to find her," Elena confirmed, cold anger settling in her chest. "This wasn't random. Someone targeted Serena specifically, and they knew exactly how to find her. The implications were chilling. This attack wasn't just on a single bobcat, but potentially on the entire wildlife conservation project, and that meant their other tracked animals might be at risk as well." 15 minutes felt like an eternity as Elena and Mark waited for backup, keeping a respectful distance from Serena and Roan while still observing them closely. The mother bobcat had settled beneath a dense thicket, partially hidden from view, while meticulously grooming her cub. Despite her injuries, her first priority remained the welfare of her offspring, checking him for any signs of harm, comforting him with gentle licks and soft vocalizations. "Her maternal instinct is extraordinary," Mark observed quietly. "Most wild animals would be focused entirely on their own survival right now." Elena nodded, her eyes never leaving the pair. "Bobcats are exceptional mothers. They'll defend their cubs against threats many times their size." She paused, her expression troubled. "What bothers me is how calculated this attack was. These chains were specifically designed to hold her in place until the train arrived. Someone wanted to make absolutely certain she wouldn't escape." Mark's response was cut short by the sound of vehicles approaching. Minutes later, Ranger Steve Stevens emerged from the forest path, followed by Dr. Leela Harmon and 2 deputy rangers. Stevens, a veteran of the Forest Service with 20 years' experience, took in the scene with a practiced eye: the discarded chains, the obvious signs of struggle along the embankment, and the injured bobcat partially visible in the underbrush. "My God," he muttered, adjusting his campaign hat, "you weren't exaggerating." Dr. Harmon, the wildlife veterinarian from the Regional Rehabilitation Center, was already assessing the situation professionally. In her early 40s, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob, she had treated everything from orphaned bear cubs to poisoned eagles during her tenure. "What's her condition?" she asked Elena, setting down her medical case. "Multiple lacerations where the chains cut into her flesh, particularly on the right flank," Elena reported. "Possible muscle strain from struggling, maybe some internal bruising. She's mobile but favoring her right side. The cub appears unharmed." Dr. Harmon nodded, her experienced gaze confirming Elena's assessment. "We need to treat those wounds before infection sets in. I'd like to bring her in for a full examination." "I agree," Elena said. "But there's more." She handed over the blue tracking tag found on the chains. "This is from our research program. Someone used our own tracking data to target her." Stevens took the tag, his weathered face darkening. "This just became a federal investigation. Tampering with endangered species research carries heavy penalties." He turned to his deputies. "Document everything. I want photographs of the chains, the tracks, any footprints you can find. Treat it like a homicide scene." As the deputies began their methodical work, Dr. Harmon prepared a sedative dart. "We'll need to tranquilize her to treat those wounds properly." Elena nodded reluctantly. "Be careful with the dosage. She's already been through significant trauma." The veterinarian loaded the appropriate dose into her dart gun with practiced precision. "I'll dart her, then we'll give it 10 minutes to take full effect before approaching. The cub will be distressed when his mother becomes unresponsive." "I can handle the cub," Elena offered. "He's shown remarkable adaptability so far." "Doctor," Harmon positioned herself with a clear line of sight to Serena, took careful aim and fired. The dart found its mark in the bobcat's shoulder. Serena flinched, then pulled the dart out with her teeth, but the sedative was already entering her system. Within minutes, her movements became sluggish, her eyelids drooping despite her evident struggle to remain alert. As predicted, Roan became increasingly agitated as his mother's consciousness faded. The cub paced around her, making urgent sounds, nudging her with his head in an apparent attempt to keep her awake. When that failed to rouse her, he positioned himself protectively over her prone form, his small body alert to any approaching threat. Elena approached slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "It's okay, Roan. We're helping her." To everyone's amazement, the cub seemed to recognize her. Though clearly stressed, he didn't flee as Elena carefully moved closer. Instead, he watched her with those intelligent blue eyes that had so impressed her during the rescue. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Harmon whispered, observing from a few paces back. "Wild cubs that age are typically terrified of humans." "This one's different," Elena replied simply. She crouched a few feet from the bobcats, allowing Roan to become comfortable with her proximity. He showed problem-solving abilities during the rescue that were well beyond what we'd expect from a cub his age. And look at how he's positioning himself. That's protective behavior, typically seen only in much older juveniles. After several minutes of patient waiting, Elena was able to move close enough to check Serena's vital signs while Roan watched warily but without aggression. Dr. Harmon followed, medical kit in hand, and began cleaning and treating the lacerations on the unconscious bobcat's body. "These cuts are deep," the veterinarian noted, applying antiseptic to a particularly nasty wound. "She'll need antibiotics and close monitoring for at least a few days." As they worked, Ranger Stevens approached with a grim expression. "Found something you should see," he said, leading Elena a short distance away where one of the deputies was photographing an area of disturbed earth. "Footprints," Stevens indicated. "Two sets, one large, men's size 12 or 13 boot with a distinctive tread pattern, the other smaller, around a size 9, with a different pattern, both relatively fresh, probably from last night before the rain really started coming down." Elena examined the prints carefully. "Can you make casts?" Stevens nodded. "Already on it. There's more. We found cigarette butts about 30 yards that way, and empty beer cans. These guys weren't particularly careful about covering their tracks. Or they didn't expect anyone to connect them to this crime," Elena suggested. "They might not realize that we track the locations of these animals so precisely, which means they don't know that we have data showing exactly who accessed the tracking information and when," Mark added, joining them. "All our research records are digitally logged." A disturbing thought occurred to Elena. If they targeted Serena using our tracking data, what about our other research subjects? We have 17 bobcats, 4 mountain lions, and over 30 bears currently fitted with transmitters. Stevens's expression grew more troubled. "You think this could be part of a larger operation?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But someone with access to our tracking data deliberately chained an endangered bobcat to railroad tracks. That's not the work of ordinary poachers looking for pelts or trophies. This was meant to send a message." Back at Serena's side, Dr. Harmon had finished treating the visible wounds and was preparing the bobcat for transport. Roan remained vigilant throughout the procedure, his behavior a remarkable deviation from the typical fight-or-flight response expected from a wild animal his age. "We'll take her to the rehabilitation center," Dr. Harmon announced. "I want to run blood tests and check for internal injuries." Elena nodded, then gestured toward Roan. "The cub comes too. I won't separate them after what they've been through." The Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sat nestled against the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains, its modern facilities designed to blend with the natural landscape. From the outside, it resembled a large timber lodge, but inside housed state-of-the-art medical equipment and specially designed recovery enclosures for injured wildlife. As the transport vehicle carrying Serena pulled into the center's receiving bay, the team was already prepared. Dr. Harmon had radioed ahead, and the staff had readied the primary treatment room for an emergency case. Elena sat in the back of the vehicle with the sedated BOBCAT and her cub, monitoring Serena's breathing while maintaining a calming presence for Roan. "She's stable," Elena reported as the doors opened and Dr. Harmon's assistants approached with a stretcher. Respiration normal, no signs of shock. Moving the sedated BOBCAT from vehicle to examination table was a carefully choreographed procedure, with everyone mindful of the watchful cub who refused to leave his mother's side. Rather than attempting to separate them, Dr. Harmon had made the unconventional decision to allow Roan to remain present during treatment, provided he didn't interfere. "I've never attempted this before," she admitted to Elena as they wheeled Serena into the treatment room. "Normally we'd isolate the cub, but his behavior is so atypical that I'm willing to try something different." Elena nodded, her attention split between the injured mother and her protective offspring. "I'll stay with him. If he becomes agitated, I'll remove him, but I think he understands we're helping." Under the bright medical lights, Serena's injuries appeared even more severe. The chains had cut deeply into her flesh in multiple locations, leaving ragged wounds susceptible to infection. X-rays revealed 2 cracked ribs and significant soft tissue bruising, though thankfully, no internal bleeding. Throughout the examination, Roan remained perched on a nearby counter, his alert gaze following every movement of Dr. Harmon's hands. When the veterinarian inserted an IV line to deliver fluids and antibiotics, the cub's ears flattened momentarily before Elena's soft reassurance seemed to calm him. "His comprehension level is remarkable," Dr. Harmon observed, applying surgical adhesive to close a particularly deep laceration. Most wild animals would be in a blind panic by now, especially with their mother unconscious. "He's been exceptional from the beginning," Elena agreed, watching as Roan settled into a sphinx-like position, still vigilant but visibly more relaxed. The way he helped free her from those chains, it was almost as if he understood the mechanics of what was holding her. As they worked, Mark entered the treatment room, his expression grim. He had remained at the scene with Ranger Stevens to complete evidence collection, while Elena accompanied the BOBCATs to the center. "We've got developments," he announced, keeping his voice low. "Stevens found something in those beer cans, fingerprints, and one of the cigarette butts had a partial DNA sample." Elena looked up sharply. "That's good news. Any matches yet?" "Not yet, but there's more. I checked our tracking system logs. Someone accessed Serena's location data at 10:42 p.m. yesterday, from inside our network." The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone with authorized access to their research data had been involved in the attack on Serena. "An inside job?" Dr. Harmon whispered, her hands momentarily stilling over Serena's wounds. Mark nodded grimly. The login credentials belonged to Carter Dawson. Elena's blood ran cold. Carter was a junior researcher who had joined their team 6 months ago, young, eager, and by all appearances, passionate about wildlife conservation. He had access to the tracking data as part of his duties monitoring nocturnal movement patterns. "That doesn't make sense," Elena protested. "Carter is dedicated to the program. Why would he target one of our research subjects?" "I don't know," Mark admitted. "Stevens is bringing him in for questioning now." A soft chirp from Roan drew their attention back to the immediate situation. The cub had moved closer to his mother, gently nudging her face with his nose as if checking on her condition. "Let's focus on these 2 for now," Dr. Harmon suggested, returning to her treatment. "The investigation is in Stevens' hands." By late afternoon, Serena had been fully treated, bandaged, and moved to a secure recovery enclosure, a spacious indoor-outdoor space designed to minimize stress while allowing for observation. The sedative had worn off, leaving her groggy but alert. Roan never left her side, even helping groom areas she couldn't reach in her weakened state. Elena watched them through the observation window, her mind churning with questions. The wildlife scientist in her was fascinated by Roan's unusual behavior, while the conservationist was horrified by the deliberate cruelty inflicted on Serena. Her phone vibrated, a text from Ranger Stevens. Carter in custody, denying everything. Claims computer was unlocked when he left the office yesterday. Coming to the center now. Need you to verify some details. Elena sighed heavily, torn between her desire to remain with the Bobcats and her obligation to assist the investigation. Mark joined her at the window, coffee in hand. Go, he said, understanding her dilemma. I'll stay with them. If anything changes, I'll call immediately. With a reluctant nod, Elena headed to the center's conference room. She arrived just as Stevens was entering, accompanied by his senior deputy. The ranger's expression was unreadable as he set a folder on the table. Carter's story checks out at least partially, he began without preamble. Security footage shows him leaving the research station at 8:15 p.m., well before the tracking data was accessed. But he admits he didn't log out of the system. Elena frowned. That's against protocol. We've had multiple security briefings about this exact issue. Convenience trumps security for most people, Stevens remarked dryly. The question is, who used his credentials after he left? Do we have footage of who entered the station after Carter left? Stevens shook his head. Camera at the rear entrance malfunctioned yesterday evening. Convenient timing. Too convenient, Elena agreed. Someone planned this carefully. The ranger nodded grimly. Which brings me to why I'm here. We need to check all your other tracked animals immediately. If this was targeted at your research program, rather than at Serena specifically, there could be others in danger. The realization struck Elena like a physical blow. She reached for her tablet with suddenly urgent movements, pulling up the tracking system. I'll verify locations for all subjects now. As she worked, Stevens continued. We found boot prints matching the ones at the scene outside the research station's back door. Whoever did this knew the facility, knew about the camera, and knew how to access your systems. Elena barely heard him, her attention locked on the tracking data scrolling across her screen. Most of the animals showed normal movement patterns, but 3 signals were troublingly stationary: a male bobcat in the northern section and 2 bears in the western quadrant. Elena's fingers flew across the tablet screen, pulling up detailed location data for each stationary animal. Thomas, our northern male bobcat, hasn't moved in 14 hours, and the 2 bears, a mother and yearling cub, have been in exactly the same spot since yesterday evening. Stevens leaned forward, studying the map. What's normal behavior for these species? Could they be denning or resting? Bears do enter periods of reduced activity, but not complete immobility, especially not both at identical timestamps, Elena explained tensely. And Thomas is a mature male in his prime. He typically covers 5 to 7 miles daily. This level of inactivity is highly abnormal. The ranger was already reaching for his radio. I need 3 teams mobilized immediately, he instructed his deputy. Coordinates to follow: full rescue equipment, medical support standing by, potential wildlife emergency, possible criminal activity in progress. As the deputy rushed to coordinate the response, Stevens turned back to Elena. Can you narrow down those locations? We need precision. Elena had already switched to satellite view, overlaying the GPS coordinates. Thomas is here, she indicated, about 2 miles north of Buck Ridge. Rough terrain, but accessible by ATV from the Forest Service Road. She swiped to the next screen. The bears are in the western drainage basin near Whitetail Creek. More remote, probably requires helicopter access. Which should we prioritize? Stevens asked, deferring to her expertise. Elena considered the question, weighing multiple factors simultaneously. Thomas is closer, and as a smaller animal, potentially more vulnerable. The bears have each other, and adult bears have fewer natural predators. Thomas it is, Stevens decided, already moving toward the door. Your tracking collar, can it give us real-time updates on his status, heart rate, temperature? Elena shook her head. The advanced biometric collars are still in development. Our current models only transmit location data. She grabbed her field jacket from the back of the chair. I'm coming with you. Stevens looked about to object, then appeared to reconsider. Your expertise could be critical, but you stay behind the response team, understood? She nodded grimly, already texting Mark with the update. As an afterthought, she added instructions for the center staff to place additional security on Serena and Roan's enclosure. If someone was targeting their research animals, the injured bobcat and her remarkable cub could still be at risk. Within 20 minutes, Elena found herself in a Forest Service truck speeding along bumpy service roads toward Thomas's location. 2 additional vehicles followed, carrying rangers with rescue equipment and a wildlife veterinarian. The tension in the truck was palpable, everyone acutely aware they might be racing against time. Tell me about Thomas, Stevens requested as they navigated a particularly rough stretch of road. 6-year-old male, approximately 35 pounds, territory spans about 25 square miles, Elena replied, her eyes never leaving the tablet's tracking screen. He was one of our first subjects when we expanded the research program 3 years ago. Healthy, dominant in his range. Stevens nodded thoughtfully. Any particular reason he might be targeted over the others? Elena considered the question. Nothing obvious. His territory doesn't overlap with any major ranches or development projects. He's deep in protected forest. Like Serena, Stevens noted. Remote, away from witnesses. The implication was clear. Whoever was behind this wanted isolation for their crimes. The truck lurched to a stop at the end of the navigable road, and the team quickly transferred to ATVs for the final mile to Thomas's location. As they approached, Elena felt a growing sense of dread. The tracking signal led them to a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. The ground here showed signs of recent disturbance, broken branches, scuffed earth, and most alarmingly, fresh tire tracks from a vehicle much larger than their ATVs. Spread out, Stevens ordered his team. Secure the perimeter first. Phillips, Dr. Rodriguez, stay back until we clear the area. The Rangers moved with practiced efficiency, weapons at the ready as they systematically swept the clearing. Elena stood beside Mark, both scientists tense with anticipation. After several minutes that felt like hours, one of the Rangers called out from the far side of the clearing. Found something, Stevens gestured for Elena and Mark to follow as he moved toward the Ranger. What they found sent ice through Elena's veins. A crude pit had been dug into the earth, approximately 6 feet deep and 8 feet across. At the bottom lay Thomas, the tracking collar still around his neck, his spotted coat unmistakable even in the gathering shadows of late afternoon. Is he alive? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Ranger already had rappelling equipment ready to descend into the pit. Movement detected. Appears injured but conscious. Relief washed through Elena, quickly replaced by renewed anger. This was no random act of cruelty. Someone had deliberately trapped the bobcat in a pit too deep for him to escape, leaving him to die slowly from exposure and dehydration. As the Ranger descended to assess Thomas's condition, Elena surveyed the surrounding area with new intensity. This is different from Serena's situation, she observed. Less theatrical, more pragmatic. Mark nodded in agreement. Doesn't seem like the same signature. Could be different perpetrators. Or adaptation, Stevens suggested grimly. After the near miss with Serena this morning, they might have changed tactics. The ranger at the bottom of the pit had reached Thomas and was carefully examining the animal from a safe distance. "Bobcat appears dehydrated but not critically injured," he reported. "No visible trauma, but he's extremely weak. Recommend immediate extraction and veterinary assessment." Dr. Valerie Chen, the wildlife veterinarian accompanying this team, prepared a mild sedative. "I'll tranquilize him first. In his weakened state, he won't be able to resist capture, but it's safer for everyone." As the rescue operation proceeded, Elena noticed something unusual about the pit's construction. "These walls aren't natural," she pointed out to Stevens. "They're reinforced with something." The ranger examined the exposed earth more closely. "Some kind of resin or epoxy spray. Makes the walls too smooth for climbing, even for an animal with claws." "That's sophisticated," Mark commented. "Not the work of typical poachers or vandals." Elena's attention was drawn to a small object partially buried near the pit's edge. Carefully, she extracted what appeared to be a broken piece of plastic. "This looks like part of a trail camera mounting bracket." Stevens took the item, turning it over in his gloved hands. They were monitoring him, watching him suffer. The realization added a new layer of horror to the already disturbing scene. This wasn't just about harming wildlife. Someone wanted to observe the results of their cruelty. While Thomas was being carefully extracted from the pit, Elena's satellite phone rang. It was the leader of the team dispatched to check on the stationary bears. "Rodriguez, we've reached the location," the ranger reported, her voice partly obscured by the whir of helicopter rotors in the background. "You need to see this. Sending video feed now." Elena switched her tablet to receive the incoming transmission, Stevens and Mark crowding close to view the screen. The camera showed a clearing similar to their current location, but what they saw there defied immediate comprehension. The bears, an adult female and her yearling cub, were ensnared in an elaborate trap system unlike anything Elena had ever encountered. Metal cables had been strung between trees in a complex web, each strand positioned precisely to restrict movement without causing immediate fatal injury. The adult bear was suspended several feet off the ground, her massive body entangled in the wire mesh, while the yearling was trapped in a smaller version of the same setup nearby. "What in God's name?" Mark whispered. "They're alive," the ranger on site confirmed through the video feed. "Dehydrated, exhausted from struggling, but alive. Dr. Reeves thinks they've been trapped approximately 18 hours. Elena stared at the imagery, her scientific mind trying to process the methodical cruelty on display. "This isn't improvised. These are engineered systems designed specifically to trap and immobilize without killing." Stevens's expression had hardened into stone. "We're looking at professional work. Military or paramilitary background, if I had to guess." "Can your team extract them safely?" Elena asked the ranger on screen. "Negative. The cable system appears to be rigged with secondary mechanisms, possibly pressure triggers. Dr. Reeves believes attempting to cut any strand without understanding the entire system could cause the cables to tighten suddenly." "They need engineering expertise," Stevens concluded. "Tell them to maintain a perimeter and wait for the tactical team. I'm calling in special resources." As Stevens stepped away to coordinate the expanded response, Mark turned to Elena, his expression troubled. "This is beyond wildlife crime. The level of planning, the technical expertise, "I know," Elena replied quietly. "Someone is sending a message. But to whom and why?" Back at the pit, Thomas had been successfully sedated and lifted to the surface in a specialized transport harness. Dr. Chen was already administering intravenous fluids to the weakened Bobcat. "He's severely dehydrated, but should recover with proper care," she informed Elena. "No broken bones or significant lacerations. Whoever did this wanted him to suffer, not die quickly." The cruelty of it made Elena's stomach churn. These were highly intelligent, conscious animals being systematically tortured by someone with both expertise and resources. As a wildlife biologist, she had encountered poaching and habitat destruction throughout her career, but this calculated malice represented something altogether different. "We need to get him back to the rehabilitation center," Dr. Chen continued. "He'll require at least a week of intensive care." Stevens rejoined them, his satellite phone still in hand. "Tactical response team is en route to the bears with a military engineer. They'll handle that extraction." He surveyed the pit site once more. "We need to process this scene completely before we leave. There might be evidence that connects these attacks." As the rangers methodically documented the area, collecting soil samples and photographing every detail, Elena found herself drawn back to the broken camera mount she had discovered. Something about it nagged at her consciousness. "Mark," she called, holding up the plastic fragment. "Does this look familiar to you?" He examined the piece carefully. "It's not standard equipment, custom-made, high-grade polymer." He turned it over, revealing a small marking barely visible in the fading light. "There's something here. Looks like a logo or insignia." Stevens provided a powerful flashlight illuminating the tiny symbol, a stylized mountain peak with what appeared to be a crosshair superimposed over it. "I've seen that before," the ranger said, his voice dropping. "That's the emblem used by Apex Resource Security." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. The private military contractors? What would they have to do with wildlife research? "They're not just military contractors anymore," Stevens explained grimly. "They've expanded into resource protection for extraction industries, logging, mining, oil and gas. They provide security for controversial projects, especially ones facing environmental opposition." The pieces began clicking into place with terrible clarity. "The Blackwater mining proposal," Elena breathed. "Our research area overlaps with their planned operation." Mark nodded slowly, the implications dawning on him as well. "The environmental impact study for their open pit mine is due next month. Our data on endangered species population patterns could potentially block the entire project. Or at least significantly limit its scope," Elena agreed, "which would cost them millions in redesigns and mitigation requirements." Stevens was already on his radio, updating headquarters with this new information. This just escalated beyond wildlife crime. If a private security corporation is involved in targeting a federal research program, we're looking at corporate sabotage, potential terrorism charges. As the team continued processing the scene, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Harmon at the rehabilitation center. "Serena stable. Roan showing unusual behavior. Can you video call when possible?" Concerned, Elena stepped away to initiate the call. Dr. Harmon's face appeared on screen, her expression a mixture of professional curiosity and amazement. "What's happening?" Elena asked immediately. "You need to see this," the veterinarian replied, turning her camera towards Serena's enclosure. The injured mother bobcat was resting on a specially designed platform, her bandaged body rising and falling with steady breaths. Beside her, Roan was engaged in what could only be described as methodical care. The cub was carefully adjusting the bedding around his mother, creating a more supportive nest. More remarkably, he appeared to be inspecting her bandages, gently touching each one as if checking their security. "He's been doing this for the past hour," Dr. Harmon narrated. "I've worked with wildlife for 20 years, and I've never seen behavior like this in a juvenile predator. It's almost deliberate nursing behavior." Elena watched, fascinated despite the gravity of their larger situation. Bobcats are highly intelligent, but this suggests problem-solving and caregiving capabilities well beyond what we've documented. "There's more, Doctor," Harmon continued, adjusting the camera angle. "Watch what happens when I approach with medication." The video showed Dr. Harmon entering Serena's enclosure with medication and fresh bandages. Immediately, Roan positioned himself between the veterinarian and his mother, not aggressively but attentively. As Dr. Harmon prepared to change a bandage on Serena's flank, the cub watched with remarkable focus. "Now watch this," Dr. Harmon narrated, deliberately placing the fresh bandage slightly askew. Roan chirped softly, then used his paw to push the bandage into better alignment. When Dr. Harmon corrected it properly, the cub settled back, seemingly satisfied. "He's quality checking your work," Elena observed, amazement evident in her voice despite the grim circumstances of their day. "Exactly," Dr. Harmon confirmed. "After 3 demonstrations, he appears to understand the purpose of the bandages. He's even been preventing Serena from licking or disturbing them, which is something we usually struggle with in wildlife rehabilitation." Elena watched the interaction with growing wonder. "Document everything," she instructed. "This level of cognitive function and adaptive behavior is unprecedented in wild felines his age." "Already on it," Dr. Harmon assured her. "How's the situation with Thomas and the bears?" Elena briefly summarized the discoveries, including the disturbing sophistication of the traps and the potential connection to Apex resource security. "Corporate sabotage," Dr. Harmon breathed. "I never imagined our research would put the animals at this kind of risk." "None of us did," Elena acknowledged grimly. "But if we're right about the connection to Blackwater mining, this goes beyond simple sabotage. They're trying to eliminate evidence that could block their permit approvals." A commotion behind Elena drew her attention back to the pit rescue. Thomas had been fully stabilized and was being prepared for transport. Stevens was conferring with his team, their expressions serious as they examined something newly discovered in the pit's construction. "I need to go," Elena told Dr. Harmon. "Keep me updated on any changes with Serena and Roan, and increase security at the center. If we're dealing with what I think we are, they might not be done." Ending the call, Elena rejoined Stevens at the edge of the pit. "What did you find?" The ranger pointed to a small electronic device partially embedded in the pit wall. "Wireless camera, military-grade, satellite uplink capability. Someone's been watching everything that happened here in real time." Mark, who had been examining the soil around the pit's perimeter, approached with another disturbing discovery. "Found these about 20 yards out," he said, holding up a plastic evidence bag containing 3 shell casings. 56 meters, standard tactical rifle ammunition, full. Stevens took the bag, his expression hardening. "They came prepared for resistance, likely armed security personnel." He turned to Elena. "This operation was professional. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were prepared to engage anyone who might interrupt." "Which means we're all potentially at risk," Elena concluded. "Not just the animals." As if confirming her assessment, Stevens's satellite phone rang. His brief conversation consisted mostly of clipped acknowledgments, but his expression grew increasingly grim. "That was headquarters," he reported after ending the call. "2 things. First, the tactical team has successfully reached the bears. The extraction will be complicated but should be complete within the hour." He paused, his next words clearly difficult to deliver. "Second, there's been a security breach at your research station. The building was ransacked approximately 30 minutes ago. Your server room was specifically targeted." Elena felt her blood run cold. "They're after our research data." "Which means they know we're connecting the dots," Stevens agreed. "We need to move, now." They worked quickly, loading Thomas into the transport vehicle, while Stevens reorganized his team for a rapid departure. "Half the team goes with the BOBCAT to the rehabilitation center," he ordered. "The rest of us will escort Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Phillips back to the research station to assess the damage." As they prepared to depart, Elena's satellite phone chimed with an incoming text from an unknown number. She opened the message, then nearly dropped the device in shock. "Stop the investigation or the next animal dies on camera. Check your email for proof we're serious." With trembling fingers, she accessed her email on the tablet. A video file had been sent minutes earlier from an anonymous address. Stevens and Mark watched over her shoulder as she played the clip. The footage showed a close-up of Serena chained to the railroad tracks, clearly filmed by one of the perpetrators. A man's voice, digitally altered to prevent identification, narrated with chilling casualness. Subject 12F, adult female bobcat, approximately 4 years old. Experiment in stress response and maternal separation. The camera panned to show Roan hidden in the nearby underbrush, watching his mother's predicament with evident distress. The voice continued, "Offspring remains nearby despite opportunity to flee. Interesting behavioral note." Elena stopped the video, unable to watch more. "They were studying them," she whispered. "This wasn't just about eliminating research subjects. They were conducting their own twisted experiments." Stevens was already on his radio, ordering immediate reinforcements to the rehabilitation center. "This recording was made before this morning's rescue," he noted. "They couldn't know we'd save both bobcats, but the threat is clear. They're watching us and they're escalating." Mark stared at the frozen video image. "How did they get your personal contact information?" "The station breach," Elena realized. "My phone and email would be in the employee records." She looked up at Stevens, fear giving way to determination. "We need to warn Dr. Harmon, but securely. If they're monitoring standard communications..." "Use my secure line." Stevens handed her his encrypted satellite phone. "Direct to the center's emergency system." As Elena made the call, Mark examined the pit site one final time. "There's something we're missing," he said, almost to himself. "Why go to such elaborate lengths? If they just wanted to eliminate evidence for the mining permits, there are simpler ways to sabotage research." Stevens considered this. "You're right. This level of sophistication, the monitoring, the different methodologies at each site, they're testing something." The drive back to the rehabilitation center was tense, the vehicles moving in tight formation with armed rangers providing escort. Elena sat beside Thomas's transport crate, monitoring his condition while her mind raced through the implications of everything they'd discovered. "Testing something," she murmured, returning to Stevens's final observation. What exactly would Apex Resource Security be testing in remote wilderness using endangered predators? Mark, seated across from her, leaned forward. What if this isn't just about clearing obstacles for the mining project? What if the attacks themselves are valuable to them? The idea sent a chill through Elena. Data collection. They're not just eliminating our research subjects, they're studying them under extreme conditions. Stress responses, problem-solving capabilities, survival thresholds, Mark elaborated, the horrific logic becoming clearer. The kind of information that would be impossible to obtain through legal research channels. But why? Elena pressed. What value does that data have to a private security firm or mining operation? Before Mark could respond, the lead ranger's radio crackled with an urgent update from the rehabilitation center. Security perimeter established. Dr. Harmon reports additional unusual behavior from subject Roan. Facility locked down. All personnel accounted for. Elena's concern for Serena and Roan intensified. Something about the cub's remarkable behavior kept tugging at her thoughts, a missing piece in this complex puzzle. As they approached the center, additional Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife vehicles were visible, forming a protective cordon around the facility. Inside, they found Dr. Harmon waiting in the secure receiving area, her expression a mixture of professional excitement and deep concern. "Thomas?" she asked immediately, eyeing the transport crate. "Stable but dehydrated," Elena reported as technicians carefully transferred the sedated bobcat to a treatment gurney. Similar presentation to Serena initially, though without the physical trauma from restraints. Dr. Harmon nodded, efficiently directing her team to begin treatment while simultaneously briefing Elena on developments with Serena and Roan. Serena's condition is improving steadily. No signs of infection in the wounds, vital signs normalizing, but it's the cub that's truly extraordinary. She led Elena and Mark to a monitoring station displaying live feeds from several enclosures. We moved them to our highest security recovery suite after your warning. That's when Roan did this. The video showed Serena resting on a padded platform while Roan systematically explored the entire enclosure. The cub's behavior was methodical, almost calculated, checking each corner, examining the walls, testing the security of the access door, and inspecting air vents with unusual thoroughness. He's searching for vulnerabilities, Elena realized. He's trying to secure their position. Exactly, Dr. Harmon confirmed, and watch what happened when we brought in the evening meal. The footage shifted to show a staff member placing food inside a small transfer chamber built into the enclosure wall, a standard procedure to minimize direct contact with wildlife patients. Roan immediately approached the food, but instead of eating, he sniffed it thoroughly, then used his paw to separate it into distinct portions, seemingly testing different pieces. "Is he checking for contamination?" Mark asked incredulously. "That's my assessment," Dr. Harmon agreed. He wouldn't eat until Serena had consumed some first and shown no adverse effects. Then he selected specific portions for himself, still leaving some untouched. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just unusual behavior, it represented cognitive functions and adaptive reasoning far beyond documented capabilities for bobcat cubs his age. "Has anything like this been reported in previous research?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Dr. Harmon shook her head. "Nothing remotely close. The nearest parallel might be tool use observed in some captive big cats, but that develops after years of environmental exposure. Roan is demonstrating problem-solving abilities that should be impossible for his developmental stage." Stevens entered the monitoring room, his conversation with headquarters complete. "We've got a preliminary ID on one of the perpetrators," he announced. Fingerprints from the beer cans matched a former Special Forces operative named Marcus Heller. For the past 3 years, he's been employed by Apex Resource Security, Elena finished grimly. The ranger nodded. His specialty in the military was animal intelligence programs. The missing piece clicked into place with terrible clarity. Elena turned back to the monitor showing Roan's methodical inspection of the enclosure. "That's it," she breathed. "They're not just studying normal wildlife behavior under stress. They're looking for outliers, animals with unusual cognitive capabilities." Mark's eyes widened in comprehension. "Military applications. Enhanced animal intelligence has been a research focus since the Cold War. Dolphins for naval operations, rats for detecting explosives. But predators like bobcats would offer different capabilities," Elena continued, the horrific logic unfolding. "Stealth, natural hunting instincts, ability to navigate complex terrain. Combined with enhanced problem-solving abilities," Dr. Harmon added, "you'd have the perfect biological surveillance system, deployable in environments too dangerous or inaccessible for human operatives." Stevens was already on his secure phone, relaying this theory to his superiors. When he finished, his expression was grave. "This just elevated to national security level. If Apex is running an unauthorized animal intelligence program, potentially weaponizing endangered wildlife. That's why they were documenting everything so carefully," Elena realized. The different trap methodologies, the monitoring systems, they were testing for problem-solving capabilities under varying conditions, looking for subjects that demonstrated exceptional adaptive intelligence. Like Roan, Mark concluded, who somehow understood the mechanics of chains well enough to help free his mother. On the monitor, Roan had returned to Serena's side, gently grooming areas around her bandages with focused attention. The tenderness of the interaction stood in stark contrast to the calculated cruelty that had placed them in this situation. "We need to protect them," Elena stated firmly, "not just as research subjects or endangered species, but as individuals with demonstrable advanced cognition." "Agreed," Stevens nodded. "I'm authorizing round-the-clock security until we can apprehend everyone involved in this operation." Dr. Harmon suddenly pointed to a different monitor, showing the center's perimeter cameras. Movement in the northeast tree line. 3 heat signatures advancing toward the facility. Stevens immediately radioed his security team, issuing rapid deployment orders while drawing his own sidearm. "They're making their move," he stated grimly. "They must realize we figured out their operation." "Or they're coming for Roan specifically," Elena suggested, a new fear gripping her. "If he's demonstrated the exceptional capabilities they're looking for, they might be attempting to acquire him rather than eliminate him." The security monitor showed Rangers moving to intercept the approaching figures, but in the enclosure display, something equally remarkable was happening. Roan had suddenly become alert, his ears swiveling toward the exterior wall that faced the northeastern approach. Somehow, despite the facility's soundproofing, the cub had sensed the approaching threat. Most astonishing of all, he appeared to be attempting to communicate his awareness to Serena, using specific vocalizations and body language to rouse his injured mother to heightened alertness. The rehabilitation center erupted into controlled chaos as Rangers deployed to intercept the approaching intruders. Elena, Mark, and Dr. Harmon remained in the secure monitoring room, watching both the unfolding security situation and Roan's remarkable response to the threat. "Look at his body language," Elena observed, pointing to the monitor. "He's not just reacting instinctively, he's strategizing." On screen, Roan had positioned himself between Serena and the exterior wall, his small body alert but controlled. When the distant sound of shouting penetrated the enclosure as Rangers confronted the intruders, the cub didn't panic. Instead, he methodically guided his still weakened mother toward the most sheltered corner of the space, using gentle nudges and specific vocalizations. "He's creating a defensible position," Mark marveled, "with clear sightlines to all entry points." Outside, the confrontation ended with surprising swiftness. The center's reinforced security measures combined with Stevens' tactical deployment had left the intruders, 3 armed men in tactical gear, with no viable approach. Within minutes, Rangers had apprehended all 3, their weapons confiscated and identifications confirmed. "All suspects in custody," Stevens reported as he rejoined them in the monitoring room. "Preliminary IDs match Apex Resource Security personnel. They were carrying tranquilizer rifles and specialized transport equipment, clearly intended for animal capture, not elimination." "They were after Roan," Elena concluded grimly. "They recognized his exceptional cognitive abilities and wanted to acquire him for their program." The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of investigation, scientific documentation, and recovery. The bears had been successfully extracted from the cable trap system and were receiving treatment for their injuries. Thomas was responding well to care, his strength returning steadily. Federal agents had raided Apex Resource Security headquarters, seizing documents and digital records that confirmed Elena's theory. The company had been conducting unauthorized intelligence testing on predator species, seeking to identify animals with exceptional cognitive abilities for military applications. Most remarkably, the investigation revealed that Serena and Roan had been targeted specifically because previous observation had suggested above-average intelligence. What the perpetrators hadn't anticipated was just how exceptional Roan's capabilities would prove to be under extreme stress conditions. 1 week after the failed infiltration attempt, Elena sat with Dr. Harmon in the observation area outside Serena and Roan's enclosure. The mother bobcat was recovering well, her wounds healing cleanly, her strength visibly returning with each passing day. Roan continued to exhibit extraordinary behaviors, from manipulating simple objects in the enriched environment to developing what appeared to be rudimentary communication patterns with both his mother and the center staff. The cognitive assessment results are unprecedented, Dr. Harmon said, reviewing data on her tablet. Roan's problem-solving abilities test at levels comparable to great apes in some categories. His spatial reasoning, tool manipulation, and especially his adaptive response to novel challenges, all far beyond documented capabilities for his species and age. "The question is what happens now," Elena replied, watching the cub methodically sorting through enrichment toys, apparently categorizing them by shape. Traditional rehabilitation and release protocols seem inadequate given what we've discovered. Stevens joined them, bringing news that would reshape their understanding of the situation even further. "The federal investigation has uncovered something remarkable," he announced. "Genetic testing on blood samples from all the targeted animals shows evidence of unauthorized experimental gene therapy conducted approximately 5 years ago in this region." "What?" Elena straightened in shock. Apparently, Apex's interest in enhanced animal intelligence wasn't merely opportunistic, Stevens explained. Their parent company funded covert genetic research targeting certain predator populations in this ecosystem. They introduced modified genetic material designed to enhance neural development and cognitive function, then simply waited to see which animals would exhibit the desired traits in subsequent generations. Dr. Harmon's professional composure momentarily faltered. They genetically modified wild endangered species without authorization? The ethical violations alone. "The legal ramifications are still unfolding," Stevens assured her, "but it explains Roan's exceptional abilities. He's not just a statistical anomaly. He's the result of targeted genetic enhancement, likely carried through Serena's bloodline." The implications were staggering. Elena turned back to the enclosure, watching Roan interact with his mother. The bond between them remained profound, transcending the trauma they had experienced together. "This changes everything about their future," she said quietly. "They can't simply be released back into the wild, not with Apex's operatives still potentially active and not with Roan's abilities potentially passing to future generations. The department has authorized a special protected status," Stevens informed them. "We're establishing a secure research and conservation facility specifically designed for genetically enhanced wildlife. Serena and Roan will be the first residents, along with the bears and Thomas, all of whom show markers for the same genetic modifications, though not as pronounced as Roan's." 3 months later, Elena stood at the perimeter of a sprawling new facility nestled in a remote valley, protected by both natural boundaries and state-of-the-art security systems. Within its carefully designed habitats, Serena and Roan explored their new territory, a space 10 times larger than standard rehabilitation enclosures, with complex environmental enrichment and minimal human interference. "They're thriving," Dr. Harmon noted, joining Elena at the observation point. "Serena's recovery is complete, and Roan continues to develop new abilities almost daily." They watched as the young bobcat constructed a simple shelter using fallen branches, arranging them with deliberate precision while Serena patrolled the perimeter of their territory. The bond between mother and cub remained evident in their coordinated movements and occasional communicative vocalizations. "The genetic modifications appear stable," Elena observed, "and transmissible. If Roan eventually mates, his offspring will likely carry these enhanced cognitive traits." Evolution accelerated by human intervention, Dr. Harmon mused. Not how nature intended, but the responsibility is ours now. As the sun began to set over the protected valley, Roan approached one of the observation points, his intelligent eyes seeming to meet Elena's across the distance. For a moment she felt that profound connection again, a bridge between species that challenged everything she thought she knew about animal consciousness. In saving Serena from those train tracks, they had discovered something that would forever change humanity's understanding of animal intelligence. The path ahead held as many questions as answers, but one thing remained certain. The remarkable bobcat cub had demonstrated that the boundaries between human and animal cognition were far more permeable than science had ever imagined.